Hello, everyone. My name is Abby Griffith. I'm the owner and founder of Clarity Fitness, and we are really, really excited to talk today about eating disorder awareness in your community, be that supporting loved ones, checking in, and we're really, really excited to just learn more. We have a lot of people that are going to be on live and or watching the recording that are in the mental health and or wellness spaces. And so no questions are silly if that doesn't happen to be your arena and you want to ask some more basic questions. That's awesome. And we can also get pretty granular if people have more specific questions too. But again, I'm Abby Griffith. I'm really excited to have y'all here today and so excited for Kristin to present. This is one of many presentations that she's done for the Clarity team, and we love her so much and always gain so much insight from her. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to you.
Cool. Hi, y'all. Yeah, thanks for joining. I think we sort of have a mixture of like what disciplines people are joining from. So if questions do come up, like pop it in the chat, cut me off. I really don't care. So we can, yeah, talk about sort of whatever y'all's needs are. So I have some slides that I'll be going over, but it will be pretty conversational. So like I said, as things are coming up, just let me know. So I'm going to pull up my slides, and we'll get started. Okay. So yeah, like Abby said, we're going to be talking about prevention and recognition. So just before we hop into that, why should you listen to me or trust what I'm saying? So I'm an eating disorder therapist. I've worked at pretty acute levels of care. So I've worked in the residential setting. I've worked in like PHP, IOP programming for eating disorder treatment centers. As a clinical director at Center for Discovery. They're no longer open in Georgia. And now I'm in the private practice space. So I have a private practice indicator. I recently started working with an eating disorder nonprofit in Atlanta. So pretty passionate about the education aspect of it and getting ahead of eating disorders, recognizing the warning signs. Because as we'll talk about, I have a lot of clients who are now in their 30s and have been struggling with this since they were 15. And so maybe if there was some recognition or if people around them just kind of knew what to look for, maybe things could have gotten addressed a little bit earlier. I, like probably most of you, have some lived experience around disordered eating, body image stuff because we live in a disordered eating world, right? And I've also loved people through eating disorder recovery. So a population that I love working with and super passionate about. So just to sort of give some more background on why we're talking about prevention and barriers to care, I guess. So a lot of the folks that I work with are not necessarily like our culture has done a really bad job of sort of having a prototypical image of what a person with an eating disorder looks like, right? Even though all of our data and all of our research shows that the overwhelming majority of folks with an eating disorder, you would not be able to tell by looking at them, right? They don't match that prototypical image. And I've had clients, and I mean, I've supervised therapists too, have had therapists say, like, well, I'm not that worried about them because they aren't underweight, right? Which is not accurate. And it becomes a barrier for people to take their own disordered eating and body image stuff seriously if they don't match that image. So I just want to sort of throw that out there at the beginning that we're not just talking about. A, we're not just talking about restrictive eating disorders, and B, we're not just talking about people who kind of fit that description or are like visibly underweight, whatever that even means. Um, and then, sort of like what I spoke to just a second ago, the longer we're in our eating disorders, the harder and more painful it is to heal. So I've had clients say to me, like, I wish someone came and like talked to my school, or I wish my parents knew that I wasn't just being healthy, or I wish my coach understood that I wasn't losing weight because I was super dedicated to my sport. I was losing weight because I was in the midst of an eating disorder. So I really think prevention and catching things early and having early intervention is the way that we decrease eating disorders developing overall. And diagnosis isn't the only time we want to intervene, right? There's this whole gray area of disordered eating and body image issues before someone really meets criteria for an eating disorder. But we wouldn't wait until for anything else, we wouldn't wait for a diagnosis to take action, right? So there is suffering and there is pain that comes before meeting full criteria, and we want to take it seriously earlier on. Just sort of a little disclaimer at the bottom, if you've been to grad school, you've heard about interns disorder. As we talk about things today, you might identify with some of it. It doesn't mean you have an eating disorder. Everything's okay. We live in a diet culture world, right? It's the water in which we swim. And so as I'm going over things, if you're like, oh, I do that. Is that bad? Like, no, it's okay. We can address it. I'll give you some tools to help other people or help yourself, right? So I just want to throw that out there. So the question I hear often from parents, professionals, community members are, how do we know if someone's crossing over from kind of just like a lifestyle change, like I want to be more active, I want to eat more vegetables, whatever, into something that's actually disordered or unhealthy. So I've these are very broad categories, right? It's not going to encompass everything. And the biggest kind of through line throughout the recognition is, if you know this person and it's out of character for them, that is a warning sign, right? But these are just broadly speaking, sort of the things that we notice when folks are starting to develop disordered eating, and kind of stay with them when they are really developing a full blown eating disorder. So starting with our first one is avoidance, right? So this could look very different. And if you have a personal relationship with this person, or they're a client of yours, you're going to have some sort of idea of what's important to them, right? And what their values are. So once we start sacrificing things that they really care about in order to adhere to a specific diet plan, right? Or the example I always give is like, if someone is really rigid in they are starting to go to a workout class every single day or even twice a day, right? Oh no, I woke up late or my work meeting ran late. So I didn't get to go to the gym earlier in the day. My best friend's birthday dinner is tonight. I'm going to cancel so I can go to the gym because I'm going to feel so dysregulated if I don't get to go work out today. That's the avoidance we're talking about, like avoiding things that we really care about in order to kind of engage in these really rigid behaviors. Avoiding our favorite foods, right? That's one of the things when working with adolescents and interviewing parents, I would hear kind of in retrospect, they noticed first, right? Like they really love Taco Tuesday. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can't have that tonight. My stomach hurts, or I ate earlier, or I have plans, I have too much homework. Avoiding these things that used to really be a part of their routine. Avoiding social events where food is served. I definitely have clients that bring their own little Tupperwares to social events, which sometimes is necessary. One, to make sure we get enough food, right? Like we want to meet our needs. Food allergies, like that's definitely permitted sometimes. But if it's coming from this rigid place of, I will only feel okay if I have this particular food here, or just avoiding the social event altogether, right? Like I don't want to be eating in front of people, or this doesn't fit into my meal plan for today or my diet for today, so I'm just not going to go. We're missing out on that social connection, and we're missing out on things that are really important to us. Or avoiding events or obligations which their body will be visible. We see this often, in spring and summer when we're at the pool or we're at the beach, avoiding that, right? And it can be even like, I feel uncomfortable in my body in my work uniform. So I start to call out more often, right? It's going to be pretty specific to that person. So essentially, when we're starting to take a step back from or skip over things that are part of our norm, part of things that are important to us in order to fulfill some eating or fitness goal, that's when it's starting to look like avoidance. The B is having a binary relationship with food and body. So I'll start with food first. That could look like categorizing foods as good or bad, right? Junk food, or I'm eating clean today. I was really bad because I had a waffle with my breakfast instead of what I meal prepped, right? Once we start like really rigidly evaluating foods or really attaching like morals to them, like good or bad, it can be sort of a warning sign we just want to be aware of. having a small kind of window of tolerance or zone of tolerance and what feels acceptable in their body, right? So I won't feel comfortable in my body until my weight on the scale matches the weight on my license. That's not true for most of us, right? And that's okay. So, or not taking care of ourselves until we reach our goal weight, right? I'll stop dieting when I get to this point. The issue that we see over and over and over again in disordered eating is the goalposts always move. So maybe they hit that goal weight, or maybe they hit the number of workouts, right? And then it almost always ups the ante, right? We start to get obsessive, it starts to take over. So that's why having these really rigid and small sort of windows of what's acceptable, what's not, is a warning sign, is because one, it doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. And two, it just sort of primes it to become an obsession. So like I said, weight, size, like I have to fit in these pants. I have to lose 10 or 15 pounds before I go to prom instead of just buying a dress that fits the body I'm in right now. Time spent exercising, right? Like if you have kids or a full-time job, or just live in the world we live in, it's hard to carve out time for yourself. So everything you do counts, right? But if you're working with a client who says, well, I didn't get here 5 times last week and I could only work out for 30 minutes instead of 45, so it doesn't count, right? That is sort of a warning sign when that rigidity comes in. Our C in the recognition piece is compensatory behaviors, which is a very fancy eating disorder world term. But essentially, it's kind of viewing exercise as making up for being bad, right? Or burning off as much as we can. There's also sort of this idea of like indulge today, restrict tomorrow. So I had pasta for dinner last night, so I have to skip a meal today, right? Or I've gone off the rails in my diet, and so now I need to eat under my meal plan, right? When we start treating our bodies and food intake like we're balancing a checkbook, again, it sort of primes our brains for it to become obsessive, for us to get really attached to the numbers, and we lose the mindfulness aspect of what our body needs is going to change day to day, and what our lifestyle looks like is going to change, and that's okay. We're supposed to evolve over time. Something that can come up in any of those categories is obsessive thoughts, of course, right? What that looks like can be starting to only focus on one part of the body, right? So if you are in the fitness space and we're making goals, which we'll touch on at the end, um, if you're seeing progress in your client, like they're lifting more weight or they're able to walk or run for a little bit longer, but they're still kind of fixated on, well, I want this body part to be more toned or smaller, right? If they're unable to really appreciate the progress their body is making for them, right? And really focusing on that, it can be sort of an obsession there. And we just want to be curious about it, not deviating from planned food. So if we say, oh, we're going to go to this restaurant, a lot of my clients look up the menu beforehand, right? Get really attached to what they're going to order. If we have to change that at all and it becomes really dysregulating, it can be sort of a warning sign too. Of course, calorie counting. I really don't recommend any of my clients calorie count. There are other ways to be mindful of what our intake is, especially if we're trying to make changes, right? If we want to eat more fiber, if we've gotten feedback from a medical professional that we need to have more protein, there are ways to kind of check in at the end of the day. What food groups have I had today? Is there one that I haven't had enough of? And then I'm going to make sure I include that in my meal or snack without tracking everything that we're eating. And then if folks are unable to be present, sometimes that looks like us being undernourished. And so our brains are, what your brain does is puts food at the forefront as a reminder, like, hey, we need energy. Hey, we need energy. So we're obsessing over food. And then it just doesn't leave enough brain space for the rest of our lives and connection. So if we're recognizing some of these signs and kind of curious about, do we intervene? What do we do? How do we say it, right? We want to kind of understand where disordered eating might be coming from. This can be a form of self-soothing, right? If this is the only way, if controlling what they're eating, really over exercising is the only way they can turn their brain off, right? That's what I hear from people all the time. or try to access like comfort or care, we can understand that. We can all relate to that, right? Especially if the rest of their life feels really overwhelming or dysregulating. So we can help them understand the function of these behaviors. This could even look like saying like, hey, you the past couple times you've come into the gym, you've said like, ooh, I've looked forward to this all day because this is the only time no one needs me, right? This is the only time no one's asking me or messaging me for things at work or from home. We just want to be curious about it, right? Like, are there things we can take off your plate right now? It seems like life is really overwhelming. This is a way that we're accessing comfort or care. We can help them see maybe that things that might appear healthy kind of at the surface level might actually be opening up doors to some self-destructive thinking, right? Like that obsessive thinking. So if someone's showing up for workouts 3 or 4 times a week, they're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, great. Like on paper, that sounds awesome, right? If all of the space in their life in between those things is taken up by thoughts and feelings around the workouts and around the meals, that is not a healthy life, right? So we want to help them understand it in a little bit more of a nuanced way. Validating their desire to have needs met. Everybody wants to feel better, right? Everybody wants to feel more comfortable or confident. A lot of my clients say they get kind of purpose and identity out of their eating disorder. That is so valid and human, and we can connect with that, even if we're not an eating disorder specialist. So, making that, helping them understand that that's okay. And if we understand the need that it's meeting, we can understand and identify other ways to meet that need. So we can say, it seems like you want to feel like you have some boxes to check today, right? And exercise or restriction or dieting is giving you those boxes to check. Let's find other boxes to check that aren't self destructive. We can also understand disordered eating as kind of numbing out, right? So if life is very overwhelming, if someone's working through something like a trauma or grief, obsessing over the food and body aspect might sort of by design take up so much space in their lives that they don't have room for the other stuff, that they don't feel like they have the tools or capacity to manage right then, right? So there is that sort of numbing out by design. And then also when we're undernourished or if we're over exercising, we can feel kind of dissociated, right? And what we want to do with that is encourage mindfulness. So checking in with our actual hunger fullness, checking in with how our body actually feels after we fuel it. An eating disorder, kind of by definition, is taking a set of food rules and using those rules to override what our body's needs are. So we have to heal from disordered eating, or take a step back from it at least, start reconnecting with what our body actually is telling us. So intervening or providing support. These are a lot of very therapisty words. I'm really sorry, but I'll explain what they mean. So we want to notice and join them, right? What I mean by that is noticing it is just being aware. It's not evaluating. It's not jumping to conclusions. It's not making a treatment plan after you notice one thing, right? Or after you see one thing. We're just kind of taking in the full picture. And joining them, I often work with families where it feels like it's support system or treatment team against the person and their eating disorder. And what we want it to feel like is the person and their support system and their treatment team versus the eating disorder. So we want to join them, right? And almost separate out like, yeah, these thoughts have really got their grips in you, right? It doesn't mean you are flawed, right? Or it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. We want to almost separate it so we can join in the humanity of it. And centering the relationship. If you're noticing these things in someone, whether you have a professional relationship with someone or a personal relationship, helping them understand, if you're bringing it to their attention, helping them understand that, hey, people in healthy relationships are going to name when something's going on, right? Like, I care about you as your therapist, and I'm noticing that you are often not eating before session and feeling really distracted. I care about you as your trainer, and I'm noticing that you are starting to talk about food a lot more when 6 months ago we were just having fun in the gym, right? So helping them understand that You're not getting on to them, right? Or confronting them really, that it's part of the relationship. And we just want to provide space for them. We want to be curious about it. We don't want to bring in labels just yet, right? Because it can sort of shut the conversation down. We just want to hear from them, like, what is their experience? And lead with compassion. Like I said, if we understand the disordered eating, we can all connect to it. I hear parents say often, like, I just don't understand why we can't just eat, right? Which is like the number one triggering thing that you could say to a person with an eating disorder. But we can understand it. If you take something that has become a part of your identity and some team comes along and says, hey, you can't do that anymore, we can all understand why that would feel scary, why we would feel like, I don't know who I am without this. I get my value from this. What does it look like if I stop engaging in it? We can all empathize and connect with that. If a person isn't super open to having that conversation, or if they're like, I am fine, leave me alone, we give them their autonomy, right? I mean, depending on like acuity here, if they're passing out at your gym, like, let's do something. But depending on their acuity, we give people their autonomy and we continue to show up as a safe person for them. What we can do is model healthy behaviors and language. So we can say, like, ooh, I had so much pasta at White Bowl last night and I still woke up hungry this morning. So I had my leftovers for breakfast, right? Like, we can talk about that with them. Sometimes people need permission, especially from people that they look up to or people that they kind of see as healthy, right? So giving them that permission. We can also educate them on, I'll go over a couple slides in just a second, like the cycle of dieting. Like, hey, actually, when we're restricting foods, we're way more likely to binge on them later. Hey, actually, when we're dieting, people gain that weight right back in like 3 to 6 months. So helping them understand that what they're doing might be a little misguided and not even aligned with their goals. And if we're comfortable, we can self disclose at an appropriate level, right? We can say, hey, I used to use my Fitness Pal as my number one used app. And then I got really obsessed with it and I was not texting people back because I was busy logging my food, right? We can let them know that we've engaged in some of these things too, because again, we live in a disordered eating world. To sort of open that door, sometimes it helps them feel a little more comfortable. Um, I won't go over these just for like the sake of time, but this is the cycle of dieting that I sort of just mentioned. And then the restrict and binge cycle. Okay. Understanding body image core beliefs. If a person, again, like, well, it kind of depends. If they're open to it, these are things we can talk about with them. Like, how are bodies talked about in your family? How are they talked about now? If you're driving in the parking lot at Target and there's a person in a larger body, is your family making fun of them? We can talk about that and understand why that's something they would want to avoid, right? Or something that got in their head. Are there comments from partners or friends on body changes? Let's make space for that and process that. How are bodies discussed in their community, right? It depends. Like, I work with like only therapists, so I don't have access to understanding like corporate world and how we talk about things, but I do know that people talk about body changes or there are really high expectations that if they're immersed in that community, it is going to start to become part of their identity. Or do they see themselves at their best when they're smallest? We see this in athletes a lot. We see this in dancers a lot, right? They actually got feedback from people around them that they were better when they were in their smallest body, even if what they did to get to that smallest version of themselves was really destructive. Okay. I think a lot of people might be kind of aware of HAES or health at every size. So I won't go over it in detail. If you're not, it's something that you should definitely look into and do some more research on. It's a framework for understanding care, and something that most eating disorder professionals are very aligned with. And this is something that if you feel very out of your depth in managing someone, not managing someone, we don't do that, in supporting someone who might be showing some warning signs here, then looking into health at every size can give you some language to connect with them about and to sort of broaden how they're seeing things as well. So, health at every size, we want to incorporate it into everyday life. We reject the idea that our weight or BMI, which is an incredibly outdated metric, is the biggest indicator of our well being, right? We know that because the people that I've worked with are at their smallest weight and they are miserable, right? They can't work, they can't go to school, they have to stop doing the things they love. So it is just a flawed way to view things. Finding opportunities to treat our bodies with respect and care, even if we don't like our body that day. There's no expectation that we love our bodies, but there is an expectation that we don't cause them harm, right? So that could look like restriction, binge eating, over exercise, just being really mean to ourselves. If we're respecting something, we're not doing those things. And then we can support ourselves with trainers or accountability partners, social media accounts that align with these values. What we want to avoid when, I don't know why, but confronting someone, that sounds like very intense. When we're having this conversation with someone, we want to avoid judgment, right? Of course, of course, of course. Um, and just being really intentional with our language, right? We want to, again, like give them permission to talk about it. We can self disclose. We can kind of overemphasize how much we understand where this might be coming from if we have access to that information. We want to avoid language that makes them feel observed, right? So we want to, if we're bringing it to someone's attention, we can say, hey, I've been noticing that lately a lot of our conversations are sort of more focused on dieting or on how you're feeling in your body that day. We don't want to say, hey, last Tuesday you told me that you felt really uncomfortable in these jeans and it made me really worried about you, right? One of the biggest fears that I hear from people in getting help for the disordered eating is they have this fear that once people know, they're going to be policed or watched, right? So if people at school or at work know I have an eating disorder and I sit down at the lunch table, they're going to be checking in on my plate, right? It might be true, right? Like we do sort of do that. It comes from a place of care, but it feels almost like an invasion of privacy a little bit. We want to avoid saying like you're not like over exercising, right? You don't have an eating disorder, right? A lot of the folks that end up developing eating disorders also kind of struggle with people pleasing, right? And so they want to make you proud, they don't want to worry you. So if we're saying like this isn't what's going on, it almost shuts down the conversation. It's not going to make them feel like this is a safe thing to talk about. We want to avoid jumping to labels, right? Like, I don't discuss diagnoses with my clients unless there's a real need to do so, because it's not the full picture of someone's well being, right? And so we don't, I hear from teens, especially like, well, I'm not anorexic. I'm like, oh, you are, but that's not important right now, right? What's important is X, Y, and Z. And how are we getting our needs met? And how are we taking care of ourselves? Therapists, people get really squirrely around eating disorder diagnoses because it's serious, right? And we want to take it seriously, but we don't want the diagnosis to lead or shape the conversation. And I sort of touched on this at the beginning. We don't want to assume that disordered eating isn't present due to size or weight. To be honest, some of the sickest folks I've worked with are in larger bodies or average size bodies, right? So we can't assume or not worry about people or not take their behavior seriously if they're not underweight or even if they're not losing weight, right? Like these behaviors can still very much be present and cause for concern. I'm looking at time. We're at 12:30. I have more slides, but I don't, they're just kind of like extras. So they're more like coping skills that we can go over at a different time, maybe. So I'll just sort of end with resources and where to go from here if you want to learn more or if you want to get some more language around having these conversations with folks who are maybe struggling with it, or these would be appropriate resources to give to them too, to say like, hey, I think this is going on here. Let's figure this out together. Here's a book you can read to learn about it more. The first one, all the way to the left, Mothers, Daughters, and Body Image. They should sponsor me. I like tell strangers about this book. It's free on Audible. It's written by a therapist, and it really talks about how we internalize messaging that was given to us about other people's bodies, right? So if our mom is zooming in on pictures taken at Thanksgiving, saying, "Oh, my stomach looks so big," right? We internalize that. And then we want to avoid our stomach looking big. So it's super interesting, and very like relationally based. The middle one is a little bit more, I mean, I can't do math, but this is very sciencey. So some of it's a little over my head. It's written by a doctor who is an eating disorder specialist. And it really talks about sort of shattering this idea that someone has to be underweight for the medical concerns to be taken seriously. So you might want to read it like a chapter at a time or half a chapter at a time and take some space to digest. But it's super, super interesting. And we would use it in residential level of care as like sort of psycho ed for people who are like, oh, I can lose my period if I keep doing this. Oh, this could affect my fertility or blood sugar or bone mass. Like all of those things can be impacted even if we're not actively losing weight. And then all the way to the right over here, this is not true of everyone, but a lot of folks who are primed for developing an eating disorder struggle with some perfectionism and or like rigidity or high expectations of self. And so this is a really good resource for that. The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. She kind of talks about different like categories of perfectionism and how it's really hard to let it go because it's probably served us in many ways and gotten us really cool things in our lives. And also, it can be destructive internally, and we don't deserve to do that to ourselves. So, just some resources if you're interested in those things. And then I just kind of want to make space for if there are any questions, comments. Cool.
Awesome. Yay. Well, thank y'all, everyone, for popping on today. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. For anyone who popped on late, just as a reminder, Clarity is an eating disorder informed online and in person fitness platform and facility. All of our trainers go through eating disorder informed onboarding, and we work really hard to make sure that we can support alongside therapists, dietitians, anyone that is supporting their client through that recovery journey. And we also do a lot of work with eating disorder treatment hospitals, providing movement services for them. So if anyone has any questions about Clarity or wants to reach out, y'all can always message us at info@clarityfitness.com. And we really hope to see y'all on future webinars. Thanks again for being here. Thanks again, Kristen.
Yeah, I think so. Bye.
Bye.